Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're checking out perhaps the most ambitious episode of Doctor Who of the revived era so far. It's the two-part story, The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit, in which the Doctor fights the devil.
I love how that's the sort of statement that it wouldn't make a lot of sense to anyone who is out who isn't a Doctor Who fan.
Yeah.
And it sounds almost ridiculous, right? But
Yeah, of course.
I think most Doctor Who fans, even if they heard it and heard that was the premise of an episode, none of us would be surprised.
Well, no.
At all, because I think it's just the nature of the show. It can, you have all time and space to explore. You can do, almost anything. Yeah.
It's also it's a rare episode of Doctor Who which examines faith to any kind of degree. It's normally something that you steer away from in sci-fi. Just if not just to make things easier on yourself and not to alienate the hardcore religious fanatics who are like, how dare the existence of other planets interfere with my gospels?
Well,
But this episode finds a good way of kind of striking the balance.
yes, it's very interesting. Yeah, I have a fair bit to say on that particular aspect of it. I'll get to it later on. I think it'll be quite interesting. But yeah, it is a bit unusual because I don't think, a concept like faith has never been confronted to this degree. Certainly before these episodes.
Yeah, certainly.
I didn't watch the video. I just saw a thumbnail of it. Was some video essay about these episodes saying that they are an examination of faith, and I'd sort of forgotten that element, sort of, because it'd been years since I've seen these episodes, and I didn't appreciate how big of a theme that was, and I think, as you say, with a lot of these themes, you're always taking a bit of a risk because it's what argument are we using? How intense are we going to be? Things like that.
Yeah.
But it does it in a interesting and pretty mature way, and in a way that it kind of subverts expectations, especially with the Doctor's characterization, because the Doctor is often very curious and wants to find answers, but in the end, what he confronts is so kind of terrifying that even he doesn't want all the answers, which is, I think that sort of adds a lot of psychological depth to him, and it helps to sort of examine these themes in a mature way. So that's kind of cool, the way.
Yeah, well,
it
it
does
also
that.
helps that the supposed origin of the beast is before time.
Yeah.
Which is a concept the Doctor can't wrap his head around.
Mm.
And I think that's a huge part of why he sort of chooses to not examine the whole story by the end of the thing. Where it's if it was just another species, he'd want all the answers, but because this is challenging his worldview, he's happy to just defeat it and let it stay at that.
Mm.
And I think it's an interesting thing the episode does, and it does it for the briefest of moments, but exploring what the Doctor's faith is.
And also what he's afraid of.
Well, yeah, to some extent.
He doesn't like what he can't understand because he's sort of, as I've said, he's kind of dedicated to getting the answers.
Yeah.
And again, as I said, the psychological depths of that are quite intriguing, and I kind of admire that even though that is a bit of a departure for him, that they took that risk, because it's quite chilling, because there's almost, I don't know, maybe there's a darkness to that implication that if this is a mystery the Doctor can't solve, then yeah, it's interesting nonetheless. It's the least you can say about it.
Yeah, and that's something you can say about this entire story. There are a whole lot of really interesting concepts and themes that get brought up, but also just really great storytelling, really great characters, really great pacing. I think outside of stories that really impact the lore of the show or a series finale kind of vibe, this is probably up there with some of Doctor Who's greatest. Especially since it's often talked about among great Doctor Who stories. It's never talked about alongside stuff Blink or Genesis of the Daleks or anything like that. It's not considered an absolute staple of Doctor Who and an example of what the show can be at its best. But it's really, really close, I think. I always forget how much I like this story whenever I rewatch it. But I think it's among the best Tennant episodes.
I'll have to wait and see till we get further into Tennant's run, but I can understand that. There's a lot of just technical elements that it's doing really, really, really well and being quite innovative.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of technical elements that it's getting right, whilst also being quite innovative. Not least of all because it does something which, I'm sure had been done in Doctor Who before and would continue to be done, but mixing like it's horror sci-fi, and even beyond sort of the visual, if not callbacks and similarities to something like Alien, for example, it still works really well. While like the fact that it's introducing, really a possession story into, a very conventional sci-fi setting, makes it really quite unique in that sense, even by Doctor Who standards, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. Let's jump to the time scales.
Sure.
Once again, these episodes are ranked separately. So I found the average. Between about 225 votes, this story has an average rating of 8.7.
The first one?
Both
together. Both of them. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's pretty fair.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. This is... I think it's certainly the best episode of Series 2 so far.
Yeah.
I don't know many people who would argue that.
Yeah. Yeah, even based on our reviews of this season so far, this is the best of them, I should say.
It's the 9th best Tennant story overall, according to timescales as well.
Again, I'd believe that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Let's have a look. We have to find the average on these. So for plot, it has about an 8.9.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things where it's like it introduces a whole lot of different elements, but then they all find a way to be relevant. Like nothing really gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, it's nice to see that it's pretty ambitious, but it's not buckling under the weight of that ambition, and it's kind of weaving the thematic elements into the plot pretty seamlessly. So yeah, I'd say plot's pretty darn good.
It's got a similar score for acting, 8.9.
Yeah, I can't really think of any weak points. Toby's pretty fucking terrifying.
Yep.
The various voices of the Beast are really chilling. Even the like the smaller characters, the crew are doing really well. And I don't know if I'd call this like one of the greatest like David Tennant powerhouse performances, but it's still pretty damn good. Particularly near the end.
It's one of the first times he's had to make like a big speech, and it's especially with no other characters present.
Basically, yeah, like the Beast is there, but no one else to sort of bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just double checking now because I'm pretty sure. I don't know where I heard this, but apparently,
sure.
That big speech that he does to the Beast in the pit, that was apparently done like at the end of a recording day, and it was apparently done in one take.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's especially for being so early in his era, it shows like the confidence David Tennant had with the role from the get-go.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's one of those things where it feels really powerful and kind of surprising, but in hindsight you realise, oh no, he was kind of sowing the seed to this kind of characterization and this sort of scale from the beginning, I think. Really showing that dedication, and it shows, even nowadays why he's kind of a fan favourite,
definitely.
Not just because he's basically coming back as the 14th Doctor. He's he's on, a different level, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
8.6 for effects.
Um, mm, yeah, I mean the Beast looks a little fake by modern standards, but
Sure.
it's not terrible, and like a lot of the effects are pretty practical, and the stuff that is, visual effects heavy, it works because most of it is like just a rocky landscape or the black hole, which is this nice
Yeah.
kind of set piece. And most of the effects are, I think, are done practically. The Ood are really great and kind of weird looking, and yeah, I think it shows its age a little bit, but it's pretty good. And at the very least, God, given how ambitious the story was, this could have been so much worse in
Oh,
terms of
definitely.
visual effects.
Yeah, and it's a small little thing, but I've always enjoyed the weird kind of frame rate dips that happen whenever like the head of security is shooting his gun at the Ood. Like it whenever it like zooms up to him and the muzzle flashes are happening, like it almost like halves the frame rate, and
Yeah, I think
it's a
it's called step motion. It was a
step motion. Yeah, yeah.
a technique very popular in the 2000s. You see it with Lord of the Rings, for example.
Sure.
It's
I
used a
can't
lot.
recall Doctor Who ever using it that much. I think this might be one of the only times it's done. So it's a really nice like stylistic touch, I think, for this kind of thing.
It is interesting because generally speaking, I'm not a fan of step motion. I think that again, it ages. It's something that's very common to the early 2000s, and it hasn't aged terribly. I'm slightly reminded of an article I read once while I was at uni, which basically said that slow motion never goes out of style. But then I realized slow motion doesn't, but step motion does.
Mm.
So I'm not like a massive fan of it on principle, but it works fine enough. Here, I'm not sure if it was used in the classic series. It's possible, but I can't remember any specific examples. But at the very least, it is a quite interesting exercise of style that
Mm.
they're going for.
Um, Combined, these episodes have a replay value of 8.7.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like a tiny bit higher, but again, that's just because we don't do things by halves.
Well, yeah,
Because yeah,
sure.
it's funny. So I've watched it as I often do twice in the last few days. The first time watching it was a little bit different to how I remembered it as a kid, but it was still really good. And then I think it was even better the second time I watched it this week. Um, I did get chills near the end.
Yeah, well, it
So
gives you a chance as well to pick up on like subtle things that happen early in the episode. Like I forget what equation it is, but I think it's like six times
six
six
point
to the
three,
power of
yeah,
six. Yeah,
yeah, things like that.
little
Which
things like that. Before you learn that the devil's involved, but then on a rewatch, it's like, okay, I get it.
and the funny thing is the way it's constructed, with the mythos that they're dealing with here.
Yeah.
Having a detail like that, 666, that could be a thing that you could so easily screw up, right? Like
Oh
that
yeah.
seems kind of goofy, but the way, as they say, the beast is kind of woven into all their lives, with the characters, but also in the story overall. That stuff still works, and it's one of
Mm.
those, great examples in Doctor Who of someone taking those risks, but them really, paying off. And as you say, it's just really nice to sort of look back and see those little details that you may have missed the first time. So yeah, it works really well.
And curiously, two people say that the story requires a previous. Um, no idea which story that would be.
Yeah, it really doesn't all that much because even like the Rose and Doctor stuff, their characterizations give a pretty good um, showing for what um, how they interact with each other, which is really interesting. Even when Rose is like talking, like I think she said, "Oh, I wish I could call my mum." Like we don't know. Like if this was your first story, you wouldn't know who Jackie is, but like you still get that emotional weight behind it, which is
Yeah.
interesting. So yeah, I don't think. I mean, I'm not sure if this is like the most standalone Doctor Who story, but yeah,
Oh,
certainly you
probably not.
really don't. You don't really need another episode. I mean, beyond the really basic concepts of what this sort of sci-fi world is, and even then, it plays, by its own rules, even by Doctor Who standards. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's pretty isolated.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably a good place to start with
Sure.
a general discussion. A huge part of this episode is sort of about like, well, I said it before. It's about deconstructing faith, but it's also about fear and all those classic you know devil temptation kind of stuff. I think it's just about like, I mean, it's weird to say, but it's just about evil, the concept of evil in general, right? Like preying on people's temptations and fears in order to
Yeah, sure.
lead astray, that kind of thing. And it's not told in so many overt words, but I think it's like the Doctor kind of describes it really well, and it's a metaphor I really enjoy him using. Whereas the instinct at the back of your head going, come on, just one more step, go for it.
Yeah. The jump.
The jump, yeah, exactly. I don't know, I think it's just really, really interesting to see a story like this after series 1, where it was all very comparatively safe. It was all pretty much terrestrial based, no stories off Earth, and if they are, they're on satellites.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we're on a planet
under a black hole.
Under a black hole, and we're fighting Satan himself.
Yeah, that's pretty ambitious for a second season. And I think you would, want to put in some of the legacy of the classic era there, because, as we've often said, in terms of ambition and strange, wacky concepts, the classic series did a lot to lay the groundwork for what the the risks that the revival could take. But it's still pretty impressive for the writers to say, yeah, they did some really insane stuff in the classic series, we're going to do that too. And it's very impressive. Incidentally, we say that this is kind of the first time these themes have been brought up. Technically, there is a story in which the Doctor kind of confronts the devil before this one. It's in Pyramid of Mars, because there's an implication that Sutekh, which is the main villain, who's, like the Egyptian god of, I'm not sure if it's, no, not really the underworld, but like, I think it's like the ancient Egyptian equivalent of like the devil, because the Doctor says to Sutekh, your name is abominated in every civilized world, whether that name be Set, Satan, Sados, and yeah, so it's interesting. Oh, and also in that story, there's a bit where Sutekh sort of tempts the Doctor similarly to the way Jesus was, in the Bible tempted in the desert, because Sutekh says, serve me truly and an empire can be yours, which of course the Doctor would never do. But anyway, the point is, it's sort of kind of been confronted before, but yeah, not to this extent, and certainly not the level of thematic complexity, I think.
Well, it's also interesting that you say, like, pulling on the history of Doctor Who using wacky concepts. It's insane how remarkably unwacky this episode ends up being. Especially with the premise of the Doctor fights Satan.
Yeah, it's pretty...
It's very easy for that kind of thing to come across as, silly and fun. And, but they treat it with, like, the exact right amount of severity and seriousness, so as to also not go the other way and, be all, take itself way too seriously for its own good. They find a really good balance here.
Yeah, they do. Oh, actually, that also reminds me, there's, of course, the classic Third Doctor story, the Daemons, in which...
and that gets name dropped in this, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, Deimos. I'm pretty sure... We should look at that story at some point, but I'm pretty sure the premise of that story... I think the Master is trying to pretend to be like a satanic priest and summon these aliens to Earth that look like, our versions of, devils, which is just... Oh, that's so weird. And that, in a way, that's kind of getting to that level of wackiness where it's... I don't know if I'd call it silly, but it's getting closer to that, and it's certainly closer to than what this story is getting to.
Yeah, certainly.
So as you say, the fact that they were this bold, but treated it with the sort of level of seriousness that they did, and managed to sort of get that right, even tonally, is pretty impressive.
It's also impressive how they managed to combine, like, this this mythological epic with a really grounded science fiction story. Because a lot of the faith stuff that comes up is in episode 2 of this story. That's where a lot of that stuff really starts to shine, when we learn that it is the devil. But that is also where we have quite an extended sequence of characters running through, not air vents, but vents, certainly, being chased by, mind-controlled aliens.
Yeah.
And the air being moved along, it's insane to me how well balanced all this stuff. I mean, I keep saying balanced, but that's really the correct word for this kind of story.
You're totally right. It's very well balanced, and certainly if we compare this to, for example, Rise of the Cybermen: Age of Steel, we said that story, the themes weren't quite sort of merging together, but here they are in a way. Like, you know what I mean? Like
strange.
Like weird sci-fi stuff, spooky Satan stuff. It's all really coming together.
I think a lot of that is on the strength of the supporting characters.
Oh yeah, no, to be
it's
sure.
one of those, like you mentioned, Alien. I do think this crew kind of, it doesn't reach those like heights, but they are kind of, each character is like just fleshed out enough for the hour and a half that this story has.
Yeah.
That you really it gives you enough time to learn the character's flaws so that the devil can then prey on them.
Yeah.
With the notable exception of the 2 crewmates who are just there to be killed by Ood,
Yeah,
who are suspiciously absent from the roll call at the start.
I was gonna say, yeah, what was that about? I remember watching it last night, like, hang on, I don't remember these people at all.
No, I don't even get lines apart from one of them screaming. Yeah, I mean they're cannon fodder, and you don't really notice it the first time round. It's just sort of like okay, well they're there. Wait, hang on, who's this person? With the exception of those 2, everyone else on the ship you get to know well enough for them to serve the roles that they need.
Yeah, for sure.
And
pretty strong characterizations.
Something that I really appreciate is that this story manages to avoid what many Doctor Who stories would do, where it's like there's one person on the crew who's very suspicious of the Doctor and companion for arriving, and right as everything's going down, and is treating them with hostility the entire time, keeping them at arm's length. But I think this episode finds a good way of getting around that, just with the sheer premise of like, how the hell did they get here?
Yeah.
Like, it kind of abandons any pretense of someone going, oh, I bet they're like, spies from rival organization here to steal our research, or they're here to kill us because they're actually aliens in disguise. I think the concept of like, they clearly don't know what's going on, but also like there's no feasible way that any counterintelligence organization could have snuck someone in. Like, that's a nice enough premise to sort of get around that hurdle really early on, without even having to address it, and just instantly getting the crew to be very cordial and nice to the Doctor and Rose, so that like they can be in on the action and have everything explained to them, and then be involved in the story. It's really great how that worked out.
Yeah, for sure. It's, yeah, like that element, as you say, it is a little bit unique, because I think we've even seen examples where that's happened. It's like, oh, who's this strange person with their really smartness? I'm not gonna let them ruin my plans. Don't listen to them, guys.
Yeah.
So it is. Yeah, it's quite nice to see it. If not flipped on its head, then subverted a little bit here.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
It's also just like, the concept of this team of explorers that was sent to a black hole just because they had the capability to. There's no like, I mean, it's briefly alluded to where it's like we could fuel the Empire or start a war, something like that.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there's no real like, oh, and I'm going to once we find this source of energy that's like powering the gravity funnel, I'm going to use it to wage a race war against the cosmos. Or, like, I'm going to like siphon it off and keep it all for myself. No, it really is just
exploration.
The human sense of exploration and curiosity that's driving them, and that's really refreshing to see.
Which is funny, because in the teaser for this story, you had that bit where the Doctor said, or start a war, and that sounds like a typical Doctor Who thing to do, but that's not really the key issue at all. It's
No.
and it's quite good that they sort of, they wrong-footed the audience like that, which is, yeah, pretty neat.
I mean, it's important to have that like perspective be there because it often is in Doctor Who, and he's used
Oh
to
yeah,
seeing
no,
that
for
from
sure.
people.
But it is like just interesting that they made it out to be this big thing in the trailer, but then when you look at the episode, it's like it's barely, like the Doctor says it once, and it's not the main point of why they're there. So that's kind of neat that they sort of subverted expectations, because as you say, that's a very Doctor Who thing to have in the plot,
Certainly, yeah.
which is pretty neat.
I also I want to highlight the captain.
Sure.
What's his name? Zachary someone?
Zachary Flane.
Flane, yeah, something to that effect. It's an interesting role that he has. It's not like the usual, barking orders kind of thing.
No, he's the captain scared of command.
Scared of command, yeah, and also like we get it briefly, like the person who's supposed to be captain perished on the way in, so he's sort of defaulted to command.
Yeah.
And we see throughout the whole thing where it's like he's like I want to get my hands dirty. I want to help out like practically. I should be the one going down to examine the surface, but because I'm the captain, I have to stay up here and push buttons from command center, and that's not really my deal. And seeing him like sort of overcome that over the second episode where he's leading them, like he's literally leading them through the air vents. I don't think that's a coincidence. Like he has to physically lead them somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
It's I don't know. It's just he doesn't have a massive character growth, but it's something that I really appreciate because it would have been so easy to just have him be like like I said, the stereotypical I'm in charge and how dare there be intruders on my base. That's an order. Do what I say. Blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. It gives him a sense of humanity that I think can often be a bit missing in those sorts of characters in Doctor Who. And it helps to elevate unsurprisingly, the very human drama that's sort of unfolding. Now, part of that I think is because you've got someone like Toby who is like sort of the chief antagonist for the station.
Yeah.
And having a sort of a blustering commander, that probably would have been too many talking heads, too much conflict going on there. But it all works, and by sort of giving Zach the space to sort of explore those more human elements, it does make it a nice change of pace to the typical blustering leader character that we would normally see in a Doctor Who story. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think especially for a first watch, Toby's one of the more compelling elements of the story.
Yeah, he's really good.
He's not only does he turn in a really good performance whenever he is possessed by the Beast, but there is like, especially for a huge chunk of episode 2, there is that sense of like, oh no, it's okay, he's fine, and then you get the reveal that he's actually still like under the devil's control and has found a more like subtle way of hiding himself in Toby. It's really, really great, because especially how you get that moment at the start of episode 2 where the security commander is going to kill Toby because he doesn't want to risk him being possessed still, and Rose is the one that's like, hey, come on, do you see any of the markings? We saw them go into the Ood, and she's right, we did. Which I think is what it's enough to like catch the audience off guard when it does happen, because we're sort of with Rose in that moment. We're like, no, it's fine now. He's the markings are gone. That was always the sign of possession for Toby. Now they've gone into the Ood. He must be okay now. The Beast has let him go. And they even they do that a bit more when he's like, deciphering the writing, and he's like, well, whatever that was, I consider the translation a bit clearer now.
Sure.
And it's all to build up to what is the final reveal of what the Beast's plan is, which is to use Toby as a vessel to escape the prison. I mean, it all just works together really, really well, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Toby is the character who very briefly at the start is at odds with the captain. Zach orders him to go somewhere, and he's like, "That's not my department," and Zach's like, "Just do it." Whereas the entire rest of the crew they're like, whenever they're given an order, they follow it basically instantly.
Yeah.
They're all like happy to help out because they need to, regardless of, you know, what their actual role is. But Toby's the one person that, you know, offers resistance to that. And, you know, I think that's must have been something that the Beast used to corrupt him.
Oh yeah, the
initially.
Beast sensed his weakness.
Yeah.
He was, you know, I suppose the rebel that he could sort of, you know, possess.
This entire episode arrives properly in that amazing "Don't look at me, don't turn around" scene.
Yeah.
That it's such a perfect scene to get you, like, to get across, okay, no, this is what the story's going to be from now on.
Yeah.
Like, it not only is it classic devil temptation maneuver, combined with "I'm right behind you, I can touch you," playing on fear, but it's just so goddamn suspenseful.
Yeah. There's a lot of really good, not just this scene, but a bunch of other really intense scenes, whether it be that or when Toby's outside and breaking the glass. That scene, that really unsettled me. Even watching it over the last few days, I was surprised how dark that was.
Yeah.
Especially, and look, like, Doctor Who's no stranger for having dark moments. It has since its beginning, but that really kind of it pushes the line into how dark it can get. Not just because of what actually happens when, you know, that horrifying scene where they find Scooty's body just floating, you know, across the window. But even just the broader implications that, you know, oh shit, the Beast, like, this is a thing now, and it's really taking root in, you know, the deepest, darkest parts of the human mind to destroy anything it can get its hands on. And the great part is, like, just even small things, like the fact that, you know, Toby's out there, he should be dead, but he's not. But we realize, oh, well, the reason for that is because, yeah, it's the devil. It's like, oh, wow, it must really be, like, the devil or some really powerful being to be able to do that. So
Yeah, it certainly...
It all comes together.
It certainly gives you an immediate sense of just how much might this antagonist has.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what's so impressive about this episode. It gives us a lot of potential lore for, you know, the very early moments of this world and this universe. You know, what is essentially a horde of angels, but not technically, but this higher species finally able to subdue the Beast, chain him up, perfect prison and all that stuff. It's a great way of and it goes back to not really getting any answers about, you know, was it before time, or was that something that the Beast was just saying in order to get under the Doctor's skin. It lets us sort of imagine what this could have been like without, like, properly showing it to us, which is, I'm glad, because it might have raised questions the episode wouldn't have been able to answer. One of which is if the Beast was chained up in this prison before time, where did the black hole come from? Like, was that a black hole that has always existed since the dawn of time? Because if so, I don't know how a universe could have been born from it.
I assumed it was more of a case that it wasn't there at the beginning of time, and it was just sort of there, but it's obviously not doing anything because the impossible planet is underneath it. I mean, unless my interpretation is incorrect.
I think it's because of the implication that the Doctor gives, where it's like, if the Beast escapes at any point, the planet falls into the black hole, which means that the black hole must have always been a part of the prison.
Okay. Yep. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Or at the very like it's part of the system to keep the Beast in prison. So,
which is something that makes me think that it was just a beast playing on the Doctor's insecurities, saying before time, because otherwise it makes no sense.
And that kind of gets to the wonderful ambiguity of this story.
Yeah, definitely. In any other story, this would be a huge plot hole, but because it's left ambiguous enough, it works in its favor.
Oh, for sure. And it reminded me of something, and I did sort of write this note down. When the Doctor is talking to the crew and said, how to know all this stuff, and the Doctor's like, yeah, it could be the Beast, or it could just be, a good psychologist could say this. I tell you what it reminded me of, is that one speech in The Exorcist where Father Merrin is talking to Father Karras, and he says, he is a liar. The demon is a liar. He will like to confuse us, but he will also mix lies with the truth to attack us. And it's just very interesting to see that sort of paralleled here. I don't know how intentional that was, and perhaps it wasn't, but and I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a horror fan, but it's just interesting to see those similarities. And even because the ending of The Exorcist is meant to be sort of grim and ambiguous, I think. The devil sort of latches onto Father Karras's weaknesses, but he kind of resists it in the end. But in a way, this story, it almost feels even more ambiguous than The Exorcist, which is kind of interesting because, again, you really just don't know what this thing is.
Yeah.
As you say, the lack of answers is its strength, and the fact that you have, when the Doctor ends it by saying, I beat it, there's enough ambiguity to make you kind of nervous, but also enough to say, okay, yes, well, we defeated it. That's good enough for us. You know what I mean?
Especially with the implication that the devil can live in ideas, and the fact that this idea of the devil is already out there across thousands of civilizations. That means that maybe the beast didn't even properly die in the black hole, and is still out there in some other form. It's a nice way of I don't think the parallel to The Exorcist is an accident, especially because of the subject matter of what they're dealing with here. I don't know if it's a direct parallel in terms of intentional parallel, but when you're dealing with subject matter the beast and Satan and what forms he may take, it's almost inevitable, I would say.
I think The Exorcist, it's one of the most famous horror movies ever made. It kind of just probably will forever impact the horror genre. For one reason or another. It's just an interesting parallel, I suppose.
Yeah, one thing I will say about this episode, and something that sort of works against its replayability, the existence of Planet of the Ood as an episode, the episode which properly gives the Ood a backstory, which kind of undoes a lot of the world building of the Ood in this episode. So now we know that when the crew are they're a slave race, they live to serve, it's all they know, they're idiots. Because of Planet of the Ood, we now know that all of that is untrue, and they are in fact domesticated and cut off from each other and forced into this. And even though they are a kind race and helping out, they would rather not be subjugated to do it.
Yeah, of course.
It does kind of... I was about to say it kind of makes everyone on the Sanctuary base seem kind of asshole-ish because they're...
Oh yeah, and I even got that because I it's been years since I've seen Planet of the Ood, but even ignoring that, I thought, this is fucked up.
Yeah, but then you remember, and again, you haven't seen Planet of the Ood in a while, but in Planet of the Ood, we see the intense and aggressive marketing that the Ood have, where, basically 99.99999% of the universe are, just in full belief of, oh, no, this is what the Ood are, and, if they don't serve anyone, they wither. I guess we'd better, buy 10 of them. That's... And Planet of the Ood is a whole lot darker than I think anyone remembers it. We'll get to that in not very long. So I think it's... With that context, I think it's just enough to, stop the crew of Sanctuary here from coming across as, Confederates, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And if anything, it's all kind of delegitimized anyway when the Ood start killing people. At that point, it doesn't matter if they had slave origins; they are now vessels for the devil. Not that it's any any easier to stomach when they are consumed by a black hole. It's very, very sad when that happens.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm very happy the Ood got a redemption in Planet of the Ood. They very much deserved it.
Yeah.
Because like you said, I think you touched on it, they have such a distinctive design.
Yeah. That it's kind of like... Because you can feel sort of how much, the BBC effects budget has kind of gone into those designs.
Oh, yeah.
So it was kind of inevitable. And they're fairly unique. I mean, they've got a bit of a Lovecraft, Cthulhu look to them, but
Yeah.
they're fairly unique, and I think I can't know for sure, but I suspect that the BBC overheads realized, oh, this is one of those weird Doctor Who designs, so we should use this again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Well, it might also have just been that they realized that the depiction of the Ood as a slave race was kind of not great.
Yeah, that's the other.
So they decided to give it a big old retcon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Many years later, which was the right call.
Because that really disturbing element, it's obviously addressed. You've got the bit where Rose sort of pushes back against it.
Yeah.
But it's not really resolved, and I did think at the end, it's like, yeah, well, thank God we've got the, Planet of the Ood, because that's kind of...
Yeah, I know, it's a bit murky, but besides that...
Yeah.
I think it also helps that when Zach is doing his report at the end of the episode, he throughout the story declares people deceased with honors.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to do the same for every individual Ood.
Yeah, one by one. Yeah, that was...
One by one, and also gives them honors, as opposed to just saying, they also, by the way, they died.
Yeah, it's that final sort of nail in the coffin that sort of sells the impact of it. And and the impact of the way they've been treated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it also sort of comes to a head when the Ood are chasing them through the vents. It's like, oh, they're not recognized as life forms, and you just sit there thinking,
why not?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, I know, right?
Jesus. Yeah. It's
and I've seen some people go, when the Doctor's like, I didn't have time to save the Ood, I can only make one trip. There's the instinct to go, well, what do you mean it's a time machine? And so they say, well, first, no, the TARDIS can't land into different places at the same time, there can't be two TARDISes existing in the same place, so he would only have time to make one trip. And when you can materialize around one person, i.e. Ida Scott, or park your TARDIS and then ferry every single Ood onto the TARDIS while the planet's falling into a black hole.
Yeah, well, it's all collapsing. Yeah,
when you do only have time to make
logistics.
one stop, it is kind of
Yeah.
And it's good that he acknowledges them as well when he's like, oh, by the way, I couldn't save the Ood.
Save the Ood. Yeah, no,
And
it's a nice humanizing moment.
He's going to reference it in Planet of the Ood where he's like, I always felt some deep shame because
Yeah.
I didn't have time to there was a lot going on. I should have dealt with the Ood situation, and not just saving them, but also the fact that they're enslaved. I should have dealt with that when I first time I was there, but there was a lot going on.
It's good that that they did address that in Planet of the Ood. To sort of, I don't know, give it a bit of thematic closure, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because you think you do want the Ood to be saved, and it is a terrible shame that the Doctor isn't able to. So
yeah,
good that they would, explore that further later
it's
on.
Very it's very emotionally manipulative. The first time all of episode 2 we see the Ood as anything but vessels for the Beast. It's showing them huddling together, cowering for their lives.
Yeah.
It's really, really sympathetic. It's for a creature that, for the entire episode, have been nothing but an obstacle for our characters to deal with.
For sure. Incidentally, I found the sort of cliffhanger for the opening sort of interesting because, well, it's funny because it's like a lot of cliffhangers, particularly in Classic Who, where it basically doesn't amount to anything. But it's kind of, I think, a little bit odd to have that cliffhanger in the opening part, and two, it helps with the characterization of the Ood because like, oh, they look scary, but oh no, they just want to, help feed us and sort of all those psychological complexities that come with that. So I thought that was kind of interesting that the story opened like that.
Yeah, I mean, the mid-episode cliffhanger isn't that impressive either. Where it's like well, apart from the pit opening is fine enough. That works well enough for, okay, here's what we're going to deal with in the next episode.
Like, it's exciting. You think, oh, yeah, what's in the pit?
But on the other side of that, you have the planet losing orbit, and then at the start of episode 2 immediately being like, nope, we're back. And then, on the other hand, we have Ood closing in on Rose and co. with 2 characters present who have active weaponry in their hands, backing up, not using them for a full minute, and then at the start of episode 2 going, oh, wait a minute, we can use these, and then deal with the situation immediately. Not very good.
Yeah, and it just goes around those things. I don't know whether, when it comes to two-parters, whether the writers, I wouldn't say drop the ball, but feel like they don't need to make those cliffhangers super suspenseful, because they know that, we've got a whole other bit of story to get through, but it is noticeable, and I don't think it's the first time that it's happened with Revival Who, and I don't think it's the last either. So
I will also say, the idea that the TARDIS would just so happen after being like ripped out of the storage containment area where it was, the idea that it would be ripped out, land on the planet, and just so happen to land exactly where the Doctor happens to stumble across it.
Yeah.
Just in time to get out of there. It's not incredibly good storytelling.
Because I always, in a way, thought maybe like the angels that chained the beast sort of made that happen, but it's not. I mean, I know we talk about ambiguity being a strength of this story, but that's just a little bit too convenient. It doesn't ruin it, but I'm just thinking,
Well, especially because of the presentation of it, like the slow pan up and the triumphant music that accompanies it. It does enough to be like, oh, hell yeah, it's the TARDIS. But then on reflection, you're like, wait a minute, how did it end up in exactly the right spot? Like, I would have even liked just a single line of dialogue about it. Like, if the Doctor had said
how it happened.
Yeah, if the Doctor had said at any point, if it's ever adrift in space, it locks onto the nearest body of mass and
or the nearest Time Lord or Archon energy or something that...
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you could always attribute it to, it's a living thing and it has some kind of autonomy. That would explain how it materialized on this base at the exact time it needed to for the Doctor to stop the beast from awakening.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of theories you could probably come up with. Like, it's not a massive plot hole, and it's certainly, I don't think, like a terrible retcon canon-breaking thing. There's enough context to explain it, but
it's just a moment of intense convenience.
Yeah, like plot convenience, but not a plot hole. And in the moment, you just want a little bit more explanation. Like, you're really happy to see it, but then when you start reflecting on it, and you don't even need to reflect on it for that long, it's like, oh, okay, I guess that was just going to happen.
Yeah. Rose gets captured or trapped, number 16. It's a moment right at the end when the Sanctuary crew immobilize her and take her to the spaceship against her will. Not the most egregious example, but, I'm keeping a tally, so I might as well bring it up.
Well, it's interesting because I know, as I've said numerous times, I don't have the same levels, the same problems with Rose that you do, but one of the things you've sort of been able to open my eyes up to a little bit is there are moments where you sort of want her to be participating more in the plot, but I think she participates pretty strongly in the plot of this story, which is really...
That's what I was going to bring up. Like, the moment of her getting captured or trapped is when she needs to for the story to continue. Apart from that, she is... This is one of her strongest performances.
Yeah, it's a good Rose episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to touch... I mean, we're going to get to this a bit later on this season as well, but I think she's at her best when cut off from the Doctor. Not always. There are times when she's cut off from the Doctor and does nothing but mope and sit around and do nothing. But here, she takes an active role. She does. She knows she's out of her depth in terms of the technology, but she's the one that, after the Doctor begins to, continues the effort in inspiring the Sanctuary crew to get off their asses.
Yeah, she rallies the
work out
troops.
the problem. Yeah, exactly.
She's almost
She's
like
also
she's like the real captain of the situation almost.
Yeah, and she's also the one that figures out that the Beast had many ample opportunities to kill them anyway it wanted to, and that thus it wants to escape. She doesn't do anything about it. She waits for the Doctor to activate the black hole and for the Beast to reveal himself before she makes the connection to Toby. Like, she doesn't piece that together before then. But it's a nice job seeing her start to piece it together.
Sure. Yeah.
That being said,
actually, no. Go ahead. Yeah.
Look, overall, my problems with Rose in this episode are minor, but there are.
Yeah.
It's like a handful of moments in the start of episode 1 of the story when it's after the black hole is revealed and the Sanctuary crew are explaining it to the Doctor and Rose, and the looks on all their faces, they're treating it very seriously. Like, we don't know what it is, we don't know why we're alive, and the Doctor can't comprehend it either. And Rose makes a couple of jokes about it, and they're not even jokes that are like, I'm telling a joke here because I'm clearly nervous and trying to lighten the mood. Not even just lighten the mood, but also raise my keep my spirits up about this.
To rationalize this.
Yeah, it doesn't read like that. It reads like someone who is ignorant to what's actually at stake here, or how serious the whole situation is, and just making jokes for the sake of it. At which point they're kind of just telling jokes for the audience, which is something that it borders on quippiness, which I'm not a huge fan of at times. To me, it's just read a room. The Doctor's very clearly focusing on this. You should be.
What does she actually say? I can't quite remember.
I don't remember both of them, but one of them is when they're talking about the gravity funnel, and she goes, "You rode down it like a roller coaster."
Right.
And with a massive smile on her face, and not the same kind of smile the Doctor has when he's like, "Oh, that's brilliant! You came because it was there."
Yeah.
It's a different kind of tone. I'm not sure if it's just the way that Billie Piper was told to read those lines, but it really just comes across like someone who doesn't understand how serious the whole thing is, which isn't great. But again, that's really where my problems with Rose in the episode end.
Yeah.
She's the first person. She's the only person to show any kind of compassion to the Ood. She's the one that starts to rally the troops. In episode 2, she figures out the Beast thing. She's the one that actually ends up killing the Beast in the end by shooting out the...
Yeah, I was going to say 2 things on that. 1, great use of Chekhov's bolt gun. 2, great one-liner.
Oh yeah, I mean,
that was great.
You have to, right? You have to.
Yeah, go to hell. It's great.
Yeah, it's also great that she must have... I'm not sure if she would have known there were emergency shields that could kick in after she shot the windscreen out. So she was fully committed to die in order to just kill the Beast in the process, which, good for her.
Yeah, that moment, it's that they're trying to make it kind of an iconic moment, right? But it's
very cheesy.
Really work. It's still, I think, the line itself, I still think it works.
It's one of the rare moments of cheese in a story as serious as this that actually kind of works. Purely because, again, you have the devil as your antagonist. If you don't kill him by saying "go to hell," you're gonna kick yourself later.
Yeah, which is true. So yeah, that was just a really fun little bit that I really quite appreciated.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, apart from I don't really have anything else to say about the story. I mean, it's just really, really great. And I think this is like the herald of what's gonna come with Revival Who. I think this is the moment where they're like, okay, we can take risks and we can tell unique stories even for Doctor Who.
Yeah, sure.
My favorite Revival stories are the ones that feel like you can only do once. Heaven Sent is a story you can only tell once. You can never.
No, you couldn't do that again.
Have a whole episode with the Doctor by themselves. My favorite Tennant episode is Human Nature. you can never tell another story where the Doctor becomes human. You know, they fully get everything they can out of that story. My favorite Matt Smith story is Nightmare in Silver. The concept of the Doctor being a Cyberman, that's something you can only do once before it starts getting stale. And again, I feel like they utilized that episode really, really well for a lot of different reasons.
For sure.
Yeah, and this feels like an episode that's like, now that we've fought the devil, what else can we do? You know, we can never bring the beast back.
Yeah.
Because that ruins the ambiguity of it. That ruins like
you couldn't.
So in order to like tell this story properly, they had to like do it to the max.
Yeah,
they couldn't leave anything on like the writers' room floor. They brought every idea to the table, and it's in this situation it really, really works
for sure. And in a way, like we even both said when we looked at the power of the Doctor, like the idea of the Master becoming the Doctor. It's such a shame it was in that episode, because what a great idea. And like you said, that you could never do that again.
No, and it's a shame that Chibnall didn't realise I've got this one really, really great idea, but not focus on it.
Yeah, and then chucked in way too many ideas.
Yeah,
as he's want to do.
It's a shame, and that's something that will come up a couple of times in Revival. We'll occasionally stumble upon some episodes that will squander their really, really great promise and potential as well. But I think in this situation, fantastic, incredible, 9 out of 10 for me.
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna take the next few moments to talk about how I feel particularly personally about this story. I'm gonna be sharing a personal anecdote to get my point across.
Okay, I'm worried.
It's good. It's a good anecdote. I think it has a nice ending.
Well, I'm just nervous because like we've spent the last hour praising this story to no end, and I'm worried you're going to turn around and go, "Now I need to share like my opinion. I think it's trash." And
No.
All this work we've done.
No. Quite the opposite.
Okay,
quite the opposite. So I'm going to try and I know I tend to speak very quickly. I'm going to try my best to sort of slow the fuck down because this I feel is kind of important.
Cool.
So when I was a kid, I suffered from chronic anxiety, which, frankly, given my experience with chronic illness, makes perfect sense. As I said several podcasts ago, I'm very blessed in a lot of areas of my life, but I'm not blessed with perfect health. That's one of the areas I'm not blessed. So there've been a number of pretty terrifying moments, which, for time and personal reasons I'm not going to get into, but suffice to say, some freaky deaky stuff. When I was around like 11, 12, my anxiety had manifested in a strange and, for me, certainly upsetting way, in which I was desperately trying to determine whether or not the devil was real. And that, to you, Cuff, and to our audience even may seem rather silly, but to me, it was very real. It was a really, really, really bad period of anxiety for me, and I was sort of struggling a bit with it. So then, these two episodes come around, and I knew they were coming. I knew the names of the episodes, quite, I think, months before they premiered. So I knew basically what was going to happen, and I just thought, really, like, oh, this is what we're doing? Doctor Who, this fantastic refuge of fiction, this great comfort of mine, it's gonna confront me with this shit too? I mean, really? So I was nervous.
Why is my source of escapism playing on my real anxieties all of a sudden?
yeah, actually, get kind of like that. So, so the episode was coming up, and I was kind of dreading it, but I sat down with my family and we watched it anyway. Now, to be fair, that first story, well, the whole story really is pretty freaky, and by the time you get to the second story, I was kind of realizing, oh yeah, this actually is, kind of as bad as I was expecting. This is pretty fucking terrifying. So it was, pretty intense experience. Um, but then it gets to the end, and it gets to the scene where the Doctor's confronting the Beast, and I think the episodes overall kind of helped to sell this next point home, but I think that in particular that scene, because the Doctor said something which even before I watched these episodes to prepare for the podcast, I could still remember it as clear as day. When he says, when confronting the Beast, that the Beast is just an idea, but an idea is hard to kill. And for me, um, that was a big moment for me, because though that line, um, it did two things for me. One, the idea is hard to kill part, it sort of validated my feelings in a way. And what I mean by that, not in a way that says, yes, you've got something to really be scared of, but just in a way that made me feel, yeah, this fear is maybe hard for other people to understand, but you're really experiencing it, Nick, and acknowledging that that's okay. Um, and the other thing it did was by saying that phrase, it's just an idea. I'm not. At that moment, it didn't. It's only didn't, I think cure me. I suppose is the way you say it. It didn't, cure me of that particular anxiety-based fear. I think it would be a couple more years before I got over it fully. But that one moment, like that 1 second, was the biggest leap I took in overcoming that fear. Um, and it really, it was one of those sort of formative experiences, I think, of childhood for me. And it allowed me to sort of think outside the box. Like, as the Doctor says, what makes the Beast version of the truth any more true than mine? And what it did was it helped me to break away from the very dogmatic, narrow-minded, and frankly terrifying worldview I'd been adopting for years at that point. And it got me to think critically, which is very important, because I think this scene is emblematic of one of my favorite qualities of Doctor Who, which is both it's embodied in the Doctor, but also in sort of the worldview that it espouses itself, which is a worldview based on the perfect combination of compassion and critical thinking. And they're things that I think that they're really important psychological tools that I took from that show that I've had with me ever since. Um, in to put it another way, that was a really intense time for me. Um, and in a way, Doctor Who was there for me when I really needed it. And also at the time, as I say, I was, chronically ill, and I got sick a lot as a child. For a person who was chronically ill and did feel like power was, often sort of taken away from him, that sort of empowerment was so important for me at that age. And it's something I've carried with me ever since. And eventually, I was able to realize what I think in my heart I knew was true all along, which is that the devil is not real. It's fake. As the Doctor says, it's just an idea. An idea created from the minds of humans trying to make sense of an often terrifying world and, a mortal existence. It's a metaphor. That's all it is. A simple metaphor. A metaphor for human fears and desires. And being able to acknowledge that, being able to affirm that eventually helped me to overcome this fear. By realizing that, as it is a fiction, an idea, a metaphor, and nothing more, there's no way it could hurt me. And perhaps most importantly, I had the power to overcome it in the end. So now, thankfully, I can very safely say, as an adult, I do not believe in the devil. And haven't for well over a decade. And I'm all the better for it. I'm, like, I'm reminded of something that another YouTuber said in a video they made. The YouTuber's called In Praise of Shadows. Quite a good video essayist. The guy behind it makes video essays about horror fiction. But there was one video where he was talking about sort of horror fiction, but aimed mostly, at children. So stuff like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Courage the Cowardly Dog, things like that. And in the end, he said something which sort of reminds me of, I think, this story. And I wrote this down last year because it reminded me of Doctor Who generally. I was just wondering where to sort of put it in, but I guess I'll put it in here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is what he says. He says, yeah, this is what I've got written down. When imagination in a being first starts, we know that evil exists in the world for no reason at all. It is instinctual. We know it is real and we fear it. We know there is a monster in the closet. We know there are beasts under our bed. We know that the dragon exists. We just might not know that there is a St. George to defeat it. And I think there is value in it that we do. And at the time, the again, the psychological pressures I was facing, as I say, compounded, I think, a lot by the visceral and frequent confrontations with my mortality, which, I mean, I don't wish to sound melodramatic about it, but that is certainly how it felt at the time. In those moments, I needed that sort of, St. George sort of remedy. I hope this doesn't sound too sappy, but, I needed a doctor, if you will.
Sure, yeah.
And it ultimately reminds me of that great Third Doctor quote, which, as I've said before, is not only my favourite quote in Doctor Who, but one of my favourites in all fiction, where the Doctor says, "Courage isn't just not about being frightened, It's being afraid and doing what you have to anyway." And those lessons from this show, I think, are what make it so powerful. Ultimately, this show demonstrates why I love Doctor Who, because that ability to find that courage, to think outside the box, to think critically, but also to underscore that critical thinking with compassion, and to, I don't know, make your way through dark times, even when it feels like, other lights have gone out. That, I think, is what Doctor Who means to me. So yeah, that's what I have to say about it.
No, very well put.
Thank you.
What score are you going to give this story then?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9. I mean, I feel like, I know, like I've said before, there's no such thing as a perfect story of any stripe, but I feel like I compare this to Dalek, and I think Dalek is, I don't know, in its own way, it's kind of merging ambition with a level of quality with the plot that I think is maybe a little bit better than this, but this gets pretty damn close. So for me, yeah, this is a solid 9.
Awesome.
Yeah.
With a little life lesson to boot.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Well, join us next time. We're going to be looking at The Three Doctors.
I'm so excited.
Very different episode.
Although, funnily, it is a story that involves a black hole and involves a villain who can't leave his prison without the prison being destroyed.
Yep, that's interesting. Yeah.
How very interesting.
Fascinating. Almost like
Funny.
we might have done this deliberately.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway.
Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And 666.
That's too many sixes.